Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of Stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about all things comic books. A comic book run, a character, a concept. He gets to pick. And a lot of his picks this month, all of his picks this month, have been dovetailing with his own BookTube event, Sumerian September, which is designed to celebrate Conan the Barbarian, the greatest character created by Robert E. Howard in his 30 short years of life on this planet. And that's easy to do. Sumerian September is easy to do. There's lots and lots of Conan stuff out there to look at, whether it's movies or a disastrous cartoon or a disastrous TV show, future disastrous movie adaptations. You should steel yourself for them. Endless amounts of comic books. And lots of pastiche novels. But since it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday, we're looking at comic books, and we're looking at one particular comic book this time around. Another pure example of Michael K. Vaughan's misspent youth. But before we get to that comic, I've got a whole bunch of stuff to take you through, because it has a long history. This comic book has a long history. You can read it without that history. It's going to be crappy either way, but the history itself is not crappy. Now, Roy Thomas was a Marvel Comics writer, a great Marvel Comics writer, in my opinion, the greatest comic book writer of them all, wrote a comic book about Conan for Marvel Comics, Conan the Barbarian. And it did well. Fans really liked it. It started selling steady. It had no bottle rocket sales, but it was steady. People liked it. They didn't miss it. And Stan Lee at the time wanted Marvel to break into the newsstand magazine market, which is slightly different. It's not comic books. It's not regulated by the Comics Code, so it can be more explicit in terms of sex and violence. And the idea was dreamt up that after a while, after a false start, the idea was drawn up to have a parallel Conan comic. Savage Sword of Conan would be a black and white, oversized magazine that would run at the same time as Conan the Barbarian. And that might strike you as no great shakes at all, but that was amazing. At the time, that was amazing. To think that you would get two issues of Conan every month that would be radically different from each other, wouldn't be connected to each other. I myself, I knew a lot of Marvel comic book fans who found that strange and unsettling, an embarrassment of riches. I was much more accustomed to it. Because with DC Comics, the home of real superheroes like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, that was common. You had Detective Comics and Batman comics every month that starred Batman. You had Superman and Action Comics every month that starred Superman. You had World's Finest that starred both of them. You had Superboy in his own book, but also Adventure Comics starring Superboy. So it was easily possible to do. The reason that it was so nonchalant in terms of DC Comics is because there was no continuity. That you didn't have to worry about continuity. You didn't have to worry about whether or not someone's appearance in issue number 135/A/2.B was going to contradict the events in a parallel but not the same comic. And what about, that's not going to work. Because you only have to worry about continuity if these things are real. Same thing as you have to worry about relevance and verisimilitude. You only have to worry about those things if your comic books are real, and they're not. But we're going to get into different layers of reality in this storyline. So I started reading Savage Sword of Conan right away. It was expensive. It was $1 per issue. That was a lot. But I thought, I'm a sucker for this stuff anyway. I love Conan anyway, so give me as much of it as you can if it's good. And boy, oh boy, was Savage Sword good. I often opinionized back then, long before my co-host of Epic Comic Wednesday was born. I used to opinionize, not on YouTube, because there wasn't a YouTube then, or the FCC would long since have cracked down on me. I used to opinionize that Savage Sword of Conan was just better. Every issue, per issue, was just better than Conan the Barbarian. And boy, oh boy, issue number 7 really did that for me. I loved Savage Sword of Conan from its first issue, but issue number 7 was the first thing I saw for Savage Sword that I thought was a masterpiece. And somewhere I have my original copy, and also just recently there was a reprinted copy of it. I have that as well. Or not just recently, 30 years ago as opposed to 50 years ago. Somewhere I have both of those. But you're not enjoying a magazine if you're worried that you're going to be tearing it apart, that you're going to be ripping the staples off the paper. Far better to go for a digital version. And there you have a Boris Vallejo cover. This is the cover of Savage Sword of Conan #7, Citadel at the Center of Time. And this is a full-length story that is incredible. Just incredible. It is not adapted from anything. Roy Thomas was happy to adapt Conan stories from anything in the world. From all the Conan stories, from all sorts of writings by Robert E. Howard that weren't Conan stories. Also fantasy, sword and sorcery stories by other people. Pastiche novels of Conan by people who weren't Robert E. Howard, but also fantasy stories that weren't by Robert E. Howard and that weren't about Conan. He was happy to adapt anything. Just call up the writer on the phone and say, hey, I really like the bones of this story. Can I play around with it a little? And it was a less litigious age. It was a far happier age. The 70s. We don't have to get into too many details about the 70s happiness for those of you who are young and impressionable. Those of you who are, little babies now, who are in your teens or in your early 20s now in the 21st century, let me just say, you don't have any idea what happiness is. You think you do. You think going viral on a TikTok post is happiness. But anyway, Roy Thomas was happy to do that. He was happy to adapt anything. But he also was really good at writing Conan. I have given in this month of Sumerian September the heretical opinion that I think Roy Thomas is the best writer of Conan. Not the best comic book writer of Conan, the best writer of Conan, period. This is a new story where we have Conan leading a band of desert warriors. And they are attacking a caravan, and the caravan is, of course, carrying lots of wealth and jewels and whatnot, but also cages of exotic animals to be used for display or a menagerie in the city. And when one of those cages opens, it's an animal Conan has never seen before. It's an animal that no one has ever seen before in the Hyborian Age. It's a saber-toothed tiger. And Conan spears it, and then it is shot dead. Once it gets loose, it's shot dead. This is gorgeous artwork by John Buscema with inks by Alfredo Alcala that I do not understand. Buscema said in a couple of interviews that he wasn't happy with what Alcala did to his artwork. I do not understand that. He is easily the best inker that Buscema ever had that wasn't himself. He makes these things into artwork, into Gustave Doré engravings. And Conan is wondering, what is this? Where did this caravan come from? What is this animal that they have? And there are stories. There are stories about a wizard whose ziggurat, whose giant temple, appeared out of nowhere. And who mysterious goings-on seem to happen around him. But he is seldom seen. And Conan eventually gets to the city, which is being protected from outsiders by a gigantic trebuchet arrow. not entirely practical. But the plot goes on. Conan is seduced in a bar by a comely wench who has evil intentions. She drugs him. He almost shakes it off, so she whacks him. And when he wakes up, he is in the ziggurat. He is in the headquarters. He has been brought as tribute, as a kind of payment to this wizard, Shamash Shum Ukin, who shows up immediately, and he has a funny hat, and he leads Conan through his headquarters and shows him some strange things. There is this ape thing, for instance. Conan has seen many ape things before, but this one strikes him as a little odd. I've fought more than enough apes in my day, and yet there's something human in the aspect of this one. What did you mean? He's an ancestor of men. And we continue on, and we get to this man, who looks like a Shema. He looks like someone from Shem. He looks like one of the rulers of Shem. Conan says, he looks like a king or a prince of Stygia. I raided the land beyond the river Styx when I led the Black Corsairs. And Shamash the wizard, says, oh, he's alive all right, though for the sake of his sanity I've thought it best not to awaken him just yet. Nor would you understand me if I told you that he is no ruler of Stygia, but a monarch of another place called the Two Lands by its people, Egypt by others, a kingdom which will not exist as such for another 15 centuries. And these are all weird things to Conan. He's not sure that he believes any of it. Then the wizard shows him something that absolutely cannot be counterfeited. He shows him a Tyrannosaurus Rex that says Gronk. And when he's telling Conan this, he slips almost involuntarily into a reverie about how this is all happening, how his Museum of Antiquities came about. Shamash Shum Ukin starts to tell Conan of visions that he has seen. And one of the visions is of future cities where bright spires that seem of shimmering glass reach up almost to the very skies, where the heavens themselves are alive with flying galleys of eerie design, where chariots race to and fro, neither horse nor oxen to draw them along. And instead of showing us airplanes and cars and skyscrapers, John Buscema has him show us those things rendered in the visual idiom that Conan would know, and that Shamash Shun Ukin would know. So we don't get cars, but we know what he's seen. We just don't know, is this the best that he can approximate, or is it breaking his mind? And he shows Conan how this is possible. There's a pit, a well. Look at that artwork. Look at how beautiful that is. Just incredible. And Conan looks down into the water, but he notices that the stars above are different from the ones below. And that's because the bucket that the wizard lowers into this well, he lowers it into time. Thousands of years in the future or thousands of years in the past. That's what the secret of this citadel is. And Conan breaks free, and the wizard summons cavemen, essentially, to fight him, and they subdue him, and then the wizard subdues them with an illusion of flame leaping from his fingertips. How wonderful. Just incredible. And when Conan awakens, he and the comely servant girl are in the bucket. They are going to be lowered down and traded to the past for whatever comes. Shamash Shum Ukin takes whatever he draws up. He doesn't know what it is ahead of time. He just figures he'll take whatever it is. And as they are descending, Conan sees visions. He sees cities being wiped out. He sees dinosaurs and kingdoms, all kinds of things that either have already happened or are going to happen. And while he also sees a bit of Shamash Shum Ukin's own history. And just before it all overcomes him, he manages to escape again. And we get a scene here. Let me show you. There's a good example of what I'm talking about here. Yeah, this right here. Conan and the wizard and the comely servant girl have to fight their way out of his ziggurat because the crowds are closing in, and also all of his time-tossed possessions, his creatures, are going mad. They are sleeking out of his control. So they all have to fight together. And we get a scene like this. Okay. Happened again. Hang on just a second here. It happened again. I actually checked. Is there any way to turn off an iPad's brightness with a hand gesture? And all of the Reddit posts said, absolutely not. That is completely impossible to do. And yet, every time I do a comic video, that's what. But this is what I'm talking about. That kind of gore, that kind of violence, you wouldn't get in a 4-color comic. But we get a great scene. Where is it here? We get a cave bear, which is always neat. These hapless villagers. We get a great scene of Conan and the wizard fighting together. That's just awesome. We get someone is killed by a pterodactyl. Not sure that's how a pterodactyl would do it, but or that a pterodactyl even would. But the main thing here, if all of Shamash Shum Ukin's creations are going to go insane, is that Tyrannosaurus Rex is going to get loose, and it does. It breaks loose of the Citadel, and well, it turns out that gigantic siege arrow comes in handy. Look at that picture. Just look at how beautiful this is. Oh, look at how lovely the composition is on that panel. That is just amazing. Anyone else, any less confident artist would have given us that from the dinosaur's point of view. Here, we get it from the arrow's point of view, as Conan lets loose, hits a bullseye on his first try, and kills this thing. But Shamash Shum Ukin does not want to face the music, so he throws himself down into his well. And who knows what will happen to him. All that's left is the town is... The Citadel is in ruins. Piercing siren. I wouldn't stop, but I would have to scream over it. I don't want to scream over it. We get these great details of this thing that is dead. And the comely servant girl. And Conan rides off while the town's butcher is trying to figure out what to do with this thing. He's obviously going to carve it up and sell it, but he doesn't know quite what to do with it. And that, Savage Sword of Conan #7, that really did it for me. It really did. I loved it, and I thought nothing of it for a few years. Years passed, and in addition to everything else, Savage Sword of Conan went on and on and on. It went to a huge number of issues, and Conan the Barbarian did as well. Conan the Barbarian went on for a huge number of issues. I know that with horrifying directness because I read a lot of those later issues of Savage Sword for Sumerian September last year. And saw how horrible they could be. But after a number of those years had passed, Marvel launched a comic book called What If? That was imaginary stories. And those of you who are not comic book fans are going to say, well, aren't they all imaginary? But thanks to... There is a continuity. There is a settled continuity in comics. Things happen. And an imaginary story in the comic book argot is... well, what if we muck around with those things? And that's what If was. It was, every issue was, well, what if something in Marvel's tiny little baby continuity had changed or had been radically different? And when What If #1 came out, I bought it, and I thought this has potential. But the main thing I liked about it is that each issue was square bound and longer, so it didn't have a regular series of creators. And that's what I found interesting about it, because I thought there was a really good chance that in that first issue, I thought there was a really good chance that I would get stories that writers had been waiting to tell and just wanted the right venue, and also artwork. The artwork would change every issue, and I thought maybe some of it will be absolutely incredible. I was absolutely right about that. I was absolutely right about that. Some of those early What If issues, one of them was... had artwork by Gil Kane that was unbelievably incredible. One of them had an Invaders storyline that was amazing. Just amazing. One of those early issues was amazing even though the artwork was entirely by George Tuska. And there was a later issue with Frank Miller artwork, 2 of them, in fact. So that was really good. Some of those issues were really, really good. Some of them weren't. Some of them are kind of stinkeroo. Obviously, it's a large page number, and it's tough to commission that much work and have it be good, especially if you're not... if you're juggling all sorts of other things as well, and you've got a steady bullpen of artists, but how many of them can do an extra 60 pages in a month? And then What If #13 came out. And it was also by Roy Thomas, and it was also drawn by John Buscema. And it was, what if Conan the Barbarian walked the earth today? And the reason I'm bringing it up, there are a couple of reasons, but the main reason that I'm bringing it up is because the premise here that will get Conan to the present day is that issue of Savage Sword of Conan. Roy Thomas just revisits it. He revisits his own story. We get the same idea of horseless chariots and galleons in the sky and whatnot. And Conan still has his visions about past and future eras of the earth. But in this reality, he no sooner sets the comely servant girl, the treacherous wench, brings her up and sets her aside, then the rope breaks and he falls into the abyss of time. And when he comes out of that abyss, he is in 1977 New York City. Right in the middle of things. He doesn't know English, of course, but he's right in the middle of, is this supposed to be Times Square? Greenwich Village. This is supposed to be Greenwich Village. We will leave aside here the visual call-outs to people that Buscema knows, and instead we will focus on the world that existed at the time of Greenwich Village. This will not strike you as, if you're familiar with Greenwich Village today, this will not strike you as familiar at all. The crowding, the stonework, the weird dilapidation of it all. But it was definitely true then. Again, if you were born in the 21st century, you will have no conception of what New York City was like before Mayor Bloomberg. You'll have no conception of what it was like in the 1970s. It was a hive of scum and villainy. It was an incredibly exciting place, an incredibly dangerous place, an incredibly seedy place, an incredibly cheap place. Look, I'm sure there are YouTube videos or documentaries of some kind. Look at the prices. Just look at the prices for anything in the 1970s in New York City, and you will come out of that documentary or that video 100% convinced that price gouging is real. Because, of course, it is. But Conan ends up in Greenwich Village, and he's a little bit hapless. He has no idea what's going on. He doesn't speak the language. Eventually, the cops notice him, and he has to flee. He doesn't know what a car is either, so when a yellow taxi cab approaches him, he attacks it. And the young woman who is driving the cab, Danette, accosts him. They can't speak the same language, but some things are universal. One of those things is that Conan never goes anywhere without his sword or his libido. And they drive to Danette's home. The city's in the midst of a blackout. There's massive lightning strikes everywhere, so there's chaos. And she takes him home, to her home in the suburbs. And they still can't understand each other, but they know enough. they know enough to be attracted to each other. But then lightning strikes a transformer, and there's a massive blackout. And Danette says, "I can't help remembering the blackout of '65." Again, this is ancient history to most of you. The blackout of '65 was legendary. It was an incredible thing. It's not the only time that a Marvel comic character, especially a Marvel comic character written by Roy Thomas, dates themselves by remembering that blackout. A couple of Marvel Comics superheroes do, in issues that now have to be retconned, because Janet Van Dyne cannot possibly remember the blackout of '65, or she's going to be 80 soon. In the darkness, they exchange their names. They can't speak the same language, but they eventually understand each other's names. Conan and Danette. And night falls over the city. Look at that artwork. That is just incredible. But there's looting and violence. The darkness, the blackout has brought out the worst in people, and Conan instinctively moves in to stop things. I'm not exactly sure why, but he does, and the crowd naturally wants to rough him up, and in the point, he handles them easily. But at one point in the melee, one young man makes the worst possible move. I know we're told, never eat at a place called Mom, never play poker with a man named Slim, don't spit into the wind, don't tug on Superman's cape. Surely another axiom of life is, no matter how wide the opportunity is, don't grab Conan's sword. It's a very, very bad idea. This kid grabs and says, "Just call me Darth Vader," and Conan rearranges his entire head. And gets more and more angry, and then at one point, out of sheer outrage, grabs one of these metal monsters, these cars, and overturns it through sheer physical force, which is causes the crowd to run because they've never seen anything like that. And they go back home. Conan has dispersed these looters, and they're talking by candlelight. They still don't understand each other. But she's showing him picture books, just whatever, just to pass the time. And one of the pictures that she shows him is the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, which is an inverted ziggurat. That's just what it looks like. What's there on the page is just what it looks like. And Conan is looking at it upside down. And since he's looking at it upside down, he immediately sees it as the ziggurat of Shamash Shumukin. And maybe thinks, well, this is a way for me to get home. She doesn't understand him, but she knows it's important to him to get there, so she drives there, just when the museum, in the darkness of the blackout, is being robbed. So they are walking around in the Guggenheim when suddenly they encounter armed robbers. And they have guns, of course, and Conan does not. He is shot, but not poorly. He's shot in the shoulder, which would do a serious amount of damage to you, but we're going to see that anyway as this video goes on and on and on. But unfortunately for these art thieves, they also shoot Danette. She also is winged in the shoulder. The shoulder is just an easy shot, and it drives Conan to a killing frenzy, and he does what I have never been to the Guggenheim without wanting to do, which is pick someone up and throw them off the edge. Because the Guggenheim it's display space around a vast interior open space. So if you threw someone over the railing on a top floor, they would fall to their death. They would burst like, an egg. Conan also does something that, when I read this issue originally in the 70s, it just froze me up. It froze up my gizzard at the mere thought of it. And I think it was meant to. It works really well, and it still does today. When the other villains are shooting at him, he himself leaps over the railing and swings along the inside of that concavity with just the grip of his hand on the solid concrete, which is it's just terrifying. And then for the final robber runs, and Conan grabs a piece of modern art and crushes the guy with it. And I remember Roy Thomas's, this is an in-joke on his part, I believe, in this issue, to say that this stuff is junk, and finally someone's found a use for this, which is to crush the head of a robber in flight. But the lightning storm is increasing, and Conan knows that if he's going to make use of it, he's going to have to be on the roof. Danette is wounded, but she is going to live. And so they have a goodbye. She hands him her cap, and he hands her an arm bracelet. And at the end, they say, your armband, then maybe, and he says, perhaps, you do understand after all, just a little. And notice the visual here. For just a moment, the word balloons are collected. They're the same. See, Conan's word balloons have this thick black border around them to show that he is speaking whatever language he's speaking. Ukrainian, I have no idea what, Turanian, I don't know what language he's speaking, but it's not English. So stylistic, visually, we see that. Except for this one panel where the word balloons mesh. Where, yes, we do understand just a little. Conan rushes back up onto the roof of the ziggurat, and is transported back to the Hyborian Age. He's transported back where he belongs. And she still has his armband, and he still has her cap, her little beret. And that was this issue of What If. What If Conan the Barbarian Walked the Earth Today is absolute masterpiece. Even when I read it the first time, I thought, that is just a perfect Roy Thomas story. It's grounded in continuity, which is Roy Thomas's big thing. He was the king of continuity. It's grounded in continuity, in this case his own continuity. And it's thrilling and touching and neatly wrapped up. But was it neatly wrapped up? Well, we'll go to another visual here, because it wasn't quite neatly wrapped up. No, because this brings us to the subject of today's video at 30 minutes in. And that is another issue of What If, many years later. This is What If number 43, where What If costs $1. All of a sudden, a 4-color normal comic book costs $1. Not Savage Sword of Conan, a larger magazine with many pages, but just an ordinary comic book. And this is What If Conan Were Stranded in the 20th Century. And I noticed it on the comic book shelves because of the Bill Sienkiewicz cover, which is great. Bill Sienkiewicz is great. But I had foreboding, and I bought the issue, and sure enough, it takes off from that issue of What If, where Conan, in this issue of What If, it's not what if a Conan story that Roy Thomas made up had ended in a different way. It's what if a what if issue had ended in a different way. It's what if Conan hadn't been whisked back to the Hyborian era and had to make a life for himself in the 20th century. And it's awful. Absolutely awful. It's horrible in every way. The artwork is terrible. The writing is terrible. Roy Thomas had nothing to do with this, unfortunately. Instead, Conan is sprung from jail. First of all, it's another way of giving away that this was in the pre-modern era, where jails spring you, where if you've committed no major offense, they don't ship you off to Louisiana for a bounty on your head of $30,000. Instead, they let you go. And he has to figure out what to do with himself in the 20th century. He has no idea how to get back to the Hyborian age. So if he's going to be here, he has to learn the language and make a living for himself. And he makes a living for himself as a thief and a reaver, and a pimp. He joins the wrong side of the law, in other words. And that's okay. To a limited extent, that's canonical. Conan was a thief in his younger days. He didn't like lowlifes. Even then, he didn't like lowlifes. And he's universally surrounded by them in this issue. But the point is that when you take him out of his age, if you have a writer who has the magic of Conan, Roy Thomas has the magic for Conan. He understands this character. He's bloody well ought to, since he wrote 1,000 issues of him. He understands this character. So if you get Roy Thomas to write Conan in the modern era, he will make sure not to juxtapose Conan with anything that's going to remove the magic of the character, which would be easy enough to do. Any of you who recently bought, just a few years ago, when Marvel Comics had the license to Conan, they made Conan a member of the Avengers, the Savage Avengers. If you bought any of those issues, I made the mistake of buying 2 of them because of the Mike Deodato artwork. You'll know that if you just put Conan in a superhero setting, everything that makes this character special goes away. Well, it doesn't take more than a few seconds for everything that makes this character special to go away in this issue. Conan is never in character for a minute, but since he's leading a criminal gang, you know that sooner or later in the 20th century Manhattan, he's going to run into superheroes. And he thankfully runs into Captain America as opposed to the Thing or Thor. And they fight in this issue. The only thing that's noteworthy in this issue, Conan the Barbarian and Captain America fight. Conan has a broadsword, and Captain America has his shield. This should not be a close fight. I know that feels disloyal to Conan, but it isn't, because it would be radically different if Conan were in his own milieu, if he were in his own books. Well, then I might reconsider the story. But in the Marvel Comics world, he's just a big bruiser with a sword. And Captain America has literally been trained to take 10 of those at the same time. 10 of them simultaneously, whether they're Conan or not. Also, Captain America is as strong as Conan. Maybe even more so. And, unlike Conan, Captain America doesn't get tired. And Captain America is wearing chainmail. And Captain America has been trained in all sorts of combat styles. Conan has not. And Captain America has a lightweight, invulnerable shield that he can manipulate like it was a part of his body. Fighting Conan with a broadsword on the streets of Manhattan and defeating him should take Captain America about 3 minutes. And instead, not only does the fight go on for panel after poorly drawn panel, but Captain America essentially loses. He takes a sword strike to the shoulder. Everybody's always getting damage to the shoulder in these things. There's no way that would happen. None whatsoever. And I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be one of those Poindextery, Android's Dungeon type nerds that endlessly debates this kind of thing. I wouldn't endlessly debate it if this comic didn't put Conan somewhere he doesn't belong. But it does. so Conan might have a chance against Daredevil. Maybe he would. But against Captain America, when he doesn't take Captain America by surprise, they square off against each other and then fight. Captain America would mop the floor with him in no time at all. And also with 9 other Conans at the same time. But instead, that doesn't happen because it's Conan's own book. So it's just garbage. Now, I have not watched Mike's video, but I shudder to think I'm assuming that this and everything else that has Conan in it from the 70s and 80s is in one of those great big heavy omnibus editions that he has. He has a whole room full of those big omnibus editions. Very tempting because they are beautiful volumes. They're just not practical to use. They're too heavy and too unwieldy, but I am sure that Marvel, once they got the franchise to Conan back, just for a little while, just for a few years, I'm sure that they hoovered up everything that they had ever done with Conan and put it in those volumes. I'm sure that's where they made their money for having the franchise when they did. So Michael K. Vaughan probably has this story commemorated somewhere. I got the issue on the newsstands, and I thought, what a waste of $1. And I thought, okay, well, there was nothing in that was any good, but it is technically a callback to an issue of What If that you really like, so surely you should keep it. And then, even back in the early 80s, I said, no way. No, this is just junk. So I closed the magazine. I pinched the bottom corner of it, the front cover, the back cover, and all the pages in between. I pinched the bottom corner. I lifted it upside down. I reached my arm across until it was extending from the little bed to the room, and then I flapped it a little. I had 8 dogs, 8 little beagles, zoom in on it. At first, when I held it out, I got all the triangle heads. They all stopped what they were doing, and I got the triangle head tilt of, well, you move things all the time, so we're going to wait for permission. And then when I wagged it, they knew they had permission to destroy something of mine. They were all older. They weren't puppies anymore, so they did wait for permission, and they were overjoyed. They were overjoyed to tear it to pieces. So that my What If Conan the Barbarian was stranded in the 20th century went into the digestive systems of 6 beagles. So I didn't even need to think about it again. It's long gone. It's a Conan pastiche, so I imagine that's why Mike chose it for Epic Comic Book Wednesday. I am going to politely ask for Tower of the Elephant, perhaps. Maybe multiple versions of Tower of the Elephant, but who knows what we'll do next time. Next time, we're running out of Epic Comic Book Wednesdays for Sumerian September. But who knows? It might not be Conan related at all. He chooses. I go along for the ride. So whatever it is, I'll be back next week to talk about it. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.